There's something about camping that always recharges my batteries. The air feels cleaner, the sounds of nature drown out the stress of everyday life, and being disconnected from HOA emails and neighborhood politics is bliss on its own. That's why, after a particularly long month, I decided to head out to a lakeside campground I'd visited once before. The place was perfect, tall pines surrounding the area, a calm lake that shimmered under the sun, and wide-open skies filled with stars at night. I had reserved a prime campsite right on the water, one of those spots you had to book months in advance if you were lucky enough to catch it open. When I arrived, I felt like I'd won the lottery. I parked, unloaded the gear, and set up my tent right where the breeze from the lake would keep things cool. A fire pit sat in the middle of the site, and the view stretched out into the horizon like a painting. It was everything I needed to get away from work, neighbors, and the endless little demands of suburban life. I set up my chair by the fire, cracked open a drink, and thought, this is it. Peace at last. And then came the crunch of tires on gravel. A big SUV pulled up 2 spots down. Out piled a family, 3 kids already screaming and fighting over who got to carry the cooler, a tired-looking husband struggling with a tent bag, and then, her. The woman had the unmistakable look, the haircut, the oversized sunglasses, the way she barked orders before even stepping out fully. I didn't need an introduction to know, this was a Karen. At first, I thought nothing of it. Campgrounds are public spaces, after all, and sometimes you get noisy neighbors. I figured they'd settle into their spot and that'd be that. But instead of unloading their gear, Karen stood still, hands on her hips, eyes locked directly on my campsite. Her gaze scanned the fire pit, the perfect lake view, the easy access path down to the water. Then, without a word to her husband or kids, she began walking, marching, straight toward me. I set down my drink and waited, already bracing myself. "Hi there," she called out in a voice too cheery to be genuine. "So, this spot right here, don't you think it's a little wasted?" I blinked. "Excuse me?" "This one," she said, gesturing at my tent, my chair, my cooler, my entire setup. "It's just so close to the water. Really the perfect spot for kids. And, well, you don't have any kids, do you?" I stared at her, unsure if I'd heard correctly. "No. This is my campsite. I reserved it." Karen waved her hand dismissively. "Oh, I'm sure you did. But wouldn't it be better for the children to enjoy it? I mean, they'd have so much fun splashing in the water while we watch from right here. You can move your things over to that site back there." She pointed toward a rocky patch near the trees, smaller, uneven ground, clearly less desirable. At that moment, I realized what I was dealing with. I hadn't even been on this trip for 2 hours, and somehow HOA Karen energy had followed me all the way into the wilderness. This wasn't just about a campsite. This was about entitlement. And Karen? She was just getting started. Karen didn't even wait for my answer. She was already pacing the edges of my campsite like a landlord inspecting her property. Her husband half-heartedly called after her, but she ignored him, too focused on staking her claim. "You see," she said, pointing toward the water, "kids need access to the lake. They can't exactly play on rocks or in the dirt. And your setup? It's really just wasted on someone who doesn't have children. Don't you agree?" "No," I replied flatly, standing now. "I reserved this spot. I paid for it. It's mine." That should have been the end of it. Any reasonable person would have realized they'd overstepped and backed off. But Karen was not a reasonable person. She clutched her sunglasses dramatically and gasped, as if I had just told her I was evicting her from the site. "Wow. Really? You're just going to sit here, selfishly hoarding the best site, while children, are stuck in the dust? Do you not care about kids having fun?" I almost laughed. It was the same tone I'd heard back in the neighborhood whenever a Karen wanted to bend the rules, except this time, instead of HOA bylaws, she was trying to weaponize morality against me. "It's not about fun," I said evenly. "It's about reservations. This is my site. End of discussion. But Karen wasn't done. She folded her arms and leaned in closer. Listen, I'm on the HOA board back in our community, and I know how to handle these situations. It's not about who clicked on the website first. It's about fairness. Families with children always get priority. That's just common sense. That line nearly made me choke. Did she really just try to extend her HOA authority into a public campground? I raised an eyebrow. This isn't an HOA property. This is a state park. Reservations are first come, first served. You didn't reserve it, I did. Her smile cracked. The sugary sweet facade slipped, and the real Karen emerged. If you had a shred of decency, you'd move. We can't camp anywhere else, it's unsafe for my kids. They need to be near the water, and this is the only suitable spot. I glanced past her to the wide open area of the campground. Half a dozen perfectly fine sites stood empty, each with its own fire pit and access to the lake. The only difference was they weren't my premium spot. Those sites look safe enough to me, I said. Her voice rose, shrill and sharp, carrying across the campground. Are you seriously telling me you'd rather hog this spot for yourself than do the right thing for children? What kind of person are you? A few nearby campers had started to watch now. Some shook their heads. Others smirked knowingly, recognizing the theater for what it was. Karen, however, doubled down, as Karens always do when they sense the crowd isn't on their side. You know what? She snapped. If you won't move willingly, I'll make sure this is handled properly. You'll regret being so heartless. With that, she spun on her heel and stomped back toward her family, barking orders at her husband to stay put, and telling her kids they might not get to swim because of selfish people. I sat back down, shaking my head, trying to enjoy the fire. But I knew it wasn't over. Karen wasn't the type to back down gracefully. No, Karen was the type to escalate. And sure enough, within the hour, I'd find out exactly how far she was willing to go. High voltage, that section. The kind of calm authority that immediately made me sit up straighter. Karen was practically glowing with smug triumph. She marched ahead of the ranger like a general leading her troops, calling out before they even reached me. Here he is, the man who stole our campsite and refuses to budge. I nearly spit out my drink. Stole? I hadn't stolen anything, I'd reserved it weeks in advance. But Karen was already in full performance mode, her voice loud enough to catch the attention of nearby campers. Sir, she continued dramatically to the ranger, we have children here. Small children. And he's selfishly refusing to give up this spot so they can enjoy the water. We had no choice but to come to you for help. The ranger nodded politely but didn't take her words at face value. He looked at me. Evening. Can I see your reservation paperwork, please? Of course, I said, already reaching into my cooler bag where I kept the printed confirmation. I handed it over without hesitation. Karen's smirk faltered for the first time. The ranger scanned the paper, checked the date and campsite number, then compared it with his clipboard. He gave a satisfied nod and handed it back to me. Everything's in order, he said. This campsite is officially reserved under your name for the weekend. Karen blinked, stunned, then immediately tried to recover. Well, yes, but we had a reservation too. They must have double booked it. The ranger raised an eyebrow. Do you have your paperwork? Her confidence wavered. She glanced at her husband, who shrugged helplessly. We didn't print it. But it's in the system, I'm sure. The ranger's voice was calm, professional, but carried an edge. Ma'am, without proof, I can't confirm anything. And I can tell you right now, we don't double book sites. If you don't have a reservation for this spot, then it isn't yours. Karen's face turned red. She stomped her foot like a child. But my kids need to be here. This spot is the only one safe enough. If you force us to move, you're putting children at risk. The ranger sighed, clearly done with the theatrics. He gestured broadly at the row of empty campsites just down the lane. There are multiple safe, available spots right there. You're welcome to set up in any of them. But this site, he turned back to me, belongs to him. End of story. The silence that followed was golden. You could almost hear the crackle of the campfires around us as other campers leaned in to watch Karen's humiliation unfold. Karen sputtered, desperate to regain control. This is outrageous. Back in my neighborhood, I'm on the HOA board. I know how to handle these situations. That did it. The ranger let out a short laugh, shaking his head. Well, ma'am, this isn't your HOA. This is a state park. And the rules here are very simple. You don't get to take what isn't yours. Now, I suggest you move along before I have to write up an incident report. The words, incident report, landed like a thunderclap. Karen's husband tugged at her arm, muttering that they should just drop it. Her kids, meanwhile, were tugging on her shorts, whining about wanting to roast marshmallows. Karen stood there, red-faced, fuming, trapped between her pride and the undeniable reality she'd lost. Finally, with a huff loud enough to echo across the lake, she turned on her heel and stormed back to her SUV, her family scrambling after her. The ranger gave me a small nod, almost like a salute. Sorry about that. Happens more often than you'd think. Enjoy your stay. I thanked him as he walked away, then sat back down by my fire with a grin. The whole campground was buzzing with the story now, and Karen had officially been put in her place. But her humiliation wasn't over yet. Because the best part of this saga was still to come. The ranger's words hit Karen harder than a bucket of cold lake water. She stomped back to her SUV, muttering under her breath, while her husband trudged behind with the tent bag dragging in the dirt. Her kids whined louder than before, asking, "Why can't we stay here? Why can't we swim here?" Karen snapped at them, because some people don't care about kids. She threw a venomous glance in my direction, but at this point, her audience wasn't buying the act. Several campers sitting around their fires chuckled openly. One man even called out, "Next time, maybe try reserving a site like the rest of us." That earned a ripple of laughter across the campground. Karen's face turned crimson. You could see the humiliation radiating off her like heat waves on asphalt. Her husband, clearly done with the drama, waved apologetically at the ranger and me before steering his family toward one of the empty sites farther back near the tree line. Not nearly as scenic, but still more than serviceable. For the next hour, I could hear Karen fussing as they set up camp, slamming tent poles into the ground, scolding her kids, complaining loudly about selfish people and poor customer service. Every now and then, her voice carried just enough for me to catch phrases like, "I'll be leaving a terrible review," and "This park clearly doesn't care about families." But the damage was done. Everyone had seen her tantrum. Everyone had seen the ranger put her in her place. And now, instead of sympathy, she was a punchline. Later that evening, as the sun dipped low and the stars began to twinkle, the ranger made his rounds again. When he stopped near my site, he smirked and said quietly, "Word travels fast. She's officially the campsite Karen now." We both laughed. By the next morning, the atmosphere in the campground had shifted. Karen and her family stayed mostly in their tent, avoiding eye contact with anyone. When they did emerge, people gave them polite but knowing smiles, the kind of smiles that said we saw what happened, and we'll never forget it. When I walked past on my way to the lake, I even heard one of her kids innocently ask, "Mom, why didn't you just get the spot earlier like he did?" That one nearly made me spit out my coffee. The truth is, Karen's greatest humiliation wasn't the ranger shutting her down, it was her own kids realizing that her emergency power plays didn't actually work outside the HOA bubble. Out here, rules were simple: reserve your spot, respect others, and enjoy nature. As for me, I spent the rest of the weekend exactly as planned, relaxing by the fire, fishing off the lake, and soaking in the peace that I'd fought and won to protect. And every time I glanced up and saw Karen sulking in the shadows of her less-than-perfect campsite, I couldn't help but smile. Because in the end, her entitlement didn't just fail, it backfired in front of an entire audience. And the lesson couldn't have been clearer: entitlement doesn't stop at the neighborhood fence. Some people drag it everywhere they go. But sometimes, karma comes wearing a ranger's badge and a wide-brimmed hat. Boundaries matter. Rules matter. And as much as Karen hated to admit it, not everything belongs to her.